the tragedy called Jeremy.
Jeremy might bring back memories for some, but for one mother, it's like reliving a nightmare. For the first time, she's talking about the song and its connection to her son's death. News 8's Cynthia Seguirre has this WFAA original.
Did not define his life.
Wanda is Jeremy's mother.
He was a son, a brother, a nephew, a cousin, a grandson. He was a friend. He was talented.
On January 8, 1991, her son walked into his English classroom at Richardson High School and shot himself in front of his peers. In an instant, everything changed.
I was at my office, work.
And what was your immediate reaction?
I didn't believe it. I was in shock. Not my son. I was going to pick him up that afternoon at school.
Even now, his mother is not sure as to the why.
How did you get through the fact that it happened in front of children?
I didn't think about it. I mean, you literally go into a fog.
That's me, always right next to my friend Eric.
Brittany King was Jeremy's classmate.
This was a big wake-up call, like, you know what? Life is not all hunky-dory all the time. Real things, tragedies happen.
She was 16 and he was almost 16 in January of 1991.
And it made me grow up pretty quick overnight, literally overnight.
Brittany remembers it like it was yesterday.
Shock and fear went into my mind. All the students, we ran to the back of the room and kind of huddled together.
Then, Brittany made a split-second decision that will forever haunt her.
Should I look? I remember thinking that, should I look? And I did. I looked. I don't know why. I don't know why I looked, but I did. And I'll never forget. I will never forget it.
A newspaper clipping about the shooting at Richardson High caught the attention of Pearl Jam.
Writing that song, I thought, you don't know, you weren't there. That story's not accurate.
He drew this in 1982.
When you walk into Wanda's home today, Jeremy is everywhere.
His Best of Shows ribbon. He won first prize at the Texas State Fair. He won Best of Shows. And this is all before he was, 12 years old.
He drew this award-winning picture of an elephant when he was just 7 years old. Jeremy clearly had a gift.
This is the room where we meet each Wednesday night.
12 years ago, Wanda decided to move on by helping others. She started leading a grief support group at her church.
When you see school shooting now, what do your eyes see?
I think of the mothers. I think of the sisters. I think what'll be said or what opinions will be thought about the student. But it's the mothers and the sisters that I want to wrap my arms around and tell them that someday it'll be better.
That was Cynthia Seguirre reporting. If you or anyone you know feels hopeless and needs someone to talk to, call the National Suicide Prevention Line.
I know what it feels like when there's just nothing left to say, and hasn't been for a while. I get it.
Dear family, I hope
Note left for everyone.
Well down there. I'm sorry this letter is not as friendly as you and I would have wanted it. This letter was written before I committed suicide. I'm just writing to thank you again for letting me stay there. And keep up the good work with Christ and yourself. You are very, very pretty. I hope you make some guy happy. Your parents too. Chris, you mean the most to me. You know how I feel. Sorry if I let you guys down. Yours truly. P.S. Call my dad for funeral info. Yours truly, Jeremy Wade Delle.
Jeremy was once a child. He did struggle. He wasn't ever an adult.
Before Jeremy's suicide, he had been struggling psychologically and had spent some time as a hospital-bound student at a psychiatric hospital to his attendance. At school had been sporadic, and he had met with Jeremy and his father too, discussed the problem. Furthermore, Jeremy had been in counseling with his father, who was separated from his mother. Richardson School District spokeswoman Susan Dacus Wilson stated, "High school administrators knew he was a troubled child, and they were trying to do as much as they could for him. An investigation would determine that Jeremy had stolen the gun from a female acquaintance of his father." True crime documentaries. In the wake of the suicide, a number of Jeremy's classmates expressed tremendous guilt for not trying to befriend him. One boy named Danny stated, "Everybody I talked to said the ultimate same thing. They wish they could have said something to him before he did it." 3. A girl who attended church with Jeremy at Casa View Baptist Church would reveal that Jeremy had been looking for love and wasn't quite sure where to find it. She said that Jeremy was a very open person and had discussed suicide in the past. Shortly before his death, he had handed this girl an envelope and asked her to give it to another friend. For this envelope contained a suicide note. Jeremy had written several suicide notes and sent several cassettes to friends before taking his own life. One of them, "To whoever I decide this is to, I have a lot going on, a little too much, more than what I can handle. I'm in too much pain, and I just want you to understand why I'm doing this. I don't hate myself. I hate what's going on in my life. My parents, a new school. I feel like I don't fit in nowhere. I realize that there will be friends that will try to ask me why, because I feel like I have to. I feel it's the only way. I figure it's been so many y'all won't even know. I'm gone, and as for ones that tried to hurt me, you didn't. Sorry, Nancy. By the time you get this letter, I will have blown my head off, aka suicide, better known as last way out. Newsflash, not your fault. It's Michelle's, along with about 137.5 other problems. I was just writing to see if you wanted to go to the funeral. Call my house and ask for my name. 690-5338. At least you didn't have to hear the boom. Love, Jeremy Wade Delle."
High school is hard for anyone, but Jeremy felt awful.
Jeremy Wade Delle was just a 15-year-old sophomore who had recently made the colossal leap from Bryan Adams High School in Dallas to Richardson High School in Richardson, Texas. But on the fateful day of January 8, 1991, he waltzed into school packing a 357 caliber Magnum, like it was the latest iPhone. That morning, Jeremy sauntered into class fashionably late, only to be greeted by his second period English teacher, Faye Barnett, who calmly instructed him to grab an admittance slip from the office. But instead of doing what any reasonable person would do, Jeremy made a beeline for his locker and retrieved the lethal weapon he had so carelessly brought along. When he strolled back into the classroom, he marched straight to the front and dramatically declared, "Miss, I got what I really went for." And then shoved the barrel of that gun into his mouth and pulled the trigger, ending his life in a heart-stopping instant right before the eyes of his teacher and 30 bewildered classmates. Can you even imagine the sheer horror before anyone could even process what the hell had just happened? Jeremy was gone. Lifeless at the front of the classroom, Brian Jackson, who had just been opening his locker right outside, described the sound as a loud bang, like somebody had just slammed a book on a desk. But within seconds, screams erupted from inside the classroom, sending students scrambling into the hallways like startled rabbits. Brian peeked inside and saw the teacher standing against the wall, crying and shaking, a sight that would haunt him forever. The young witnesses were quickly ushered into another classroom as the school district's volunteer crisis team swooped in to help them navigate their unimaginable grief. Since Jeremy had only been at the school for a couple of months, he hadn't really forged any strong connections, according to his teacher. He was more of a loner who preferred to spend his time in solitude. He was real quiet and acted down at times. He seemed sad, recalled Kaurikashi. Lisa Moore, who had crossed paths with Jeremy in the Insicle suspension program, shared that they would exchange notes. He often signed off with "right back." But on that tragic Monday, he had signed off with a chilling "later days." What a gut-wrenching farewell, right? Rest in paradise, Jeremy Wade Delle.
So Mama Columbine just had to chime in. This is an article, touches on a lot. My main takeaway from is that pain inspires art.
Pearl Jam's Jeremy and the Intractable Cultural Script of School Shooters by Daniel Wenger. February 25th, 2016. Save the story. For 2 decades, an iconic song and music video about teen suicide have been widely understood as a story of murder. Sue Klebold's memoir, A Mother's Reckoning, begins with a public tragedy. On April 20th, 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold armed themselves with guns and explosives and walked into Columbine High School. It continues with a private one. Dylan Klebold was my son. Klebold's project is to reconcile the private image of her son with the public one, to grasp how someone she so loved, someone by many accounts lovable, could have done something so horrifying. 17 years later, she still cannot generate an answer. There is Bill, the boy she raised, and _Time_ magazine's monster next door. The boy she never knew. The Dylan she never knew was, above all else, suicidal. Dwayne Fuselier, a clinical psychologist and the FBI agent in charge of the Columbine investigation, told her that Harris, whom analysts posthumously judged a psychopath, went to the school to kill people and didn't care if he died, while Dylan wanted to die and didn't care if others died as well. Klebold notes that roughly half of the nearly 200 rampage shooters active in America between 1966 and 2000 were suicidal, citing a 2013 paper by the criminal justice specialist Adam Langford. Truly suicidal or not, rampage shooters have less than a 1% chance of escaping the consequences of their actions, she writes. To plan an event with such a disastrously low chance of escape or survival implies what Langford calls life indifference. Sometimes, it appears, children enter the cell of their teenage years and find this indifference stored inside, fully fledged. And, in the United States, a gun is never far away. If most school shootings are also teen suicides, the potential for mass violence begins to seem ubiquitous. As Klebold points out, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has ranked suicide the third leading cause of death among children between 10 and 14 years old, and the second leading cause among those between 15 and 24. Klebold writes, "We know, without a doubt, that exposure to suicide or suicidal behavior can influence other vulnerable people to make an attempt." She regrets the release of surveillance footage of her son and his accomplice during the massacre and celebrates Jefferson County's decision to keep private the so-called basement tapes, a series of threatening videos that the pair made before the murders. She also mentions Goethe's 1774 novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther, and the suicide of its lovelorn protagonist, which reportedly set off a battery of real-life copycats in much of Europe, a phenomenon codified in 1974 by the sociologist David Phillips as the Werther effect. Although Klebold does not think of herself as pro-censorship, She believes that video games, for instance, are likely particularly dangerous for vulnerable kids who are struggling with brain illness or other cofactors. She adds, "In an act I greatly respect, the novelist Stephen King asked his publisher to withdraw his novel, Rage, after a number of school shooters quoted from it." Rage, about a teen who shoots up his high school and takes his algebra class hostage, was a favorite of Barry Loukaitis. 20 years ago this month, when Loukaitis was 14, he walked into Frontier Middle School dressed in a black duster and carrying 2 handguns, 78 rounds of ammunition, and a hunting rifle, as Malcolm Gladwell put it, last October in The New Yorker. After killing 3 people, including his algebra teacher, Loukaitis was subdued. Gladwell, writing shortly after a massacre at Umpqua Community College in Oregon, argued that school shooters aren't inherently deranged. Instead, over decades, a riot logic has unfolded, with the truly disturbed throwing the first bricks, followed by those who have overcome higher natural barriers to violence. Killers like Eric Harris, who needed no encouragement to resort to murder, make it easier for the likes of Dylan Klebold to participate. The black coat of Loukaitis, the black coats of Klebold and Harris, these have become part of the standard uniform for school shooters, as Gladwell puts it, invoking the sociologist Ralph Larkin's notion that Columbine laid down the cultural script for the next generation of shooters. Each new shooting seems to cement Columbine's place at the start of the line, but the script has a prehistory, too. When Loukaitis was tried, his defense team claimed that he'd taken inspiration from the music video for Pearl Jam's Jeremy, from the group's 1991 album, 10, which describes a boy who imagines mountaintops slash with him on top, as the dead lay in pools of maroon below. The video, released the next year, alternates between clips of Pearl Jam's frontman, Eddie Vedder, wide-eyed and greasy-haired, and visions of the teenage Jeremy, tearing through his parents' home and a forest clearing before finally bringing a gun to school. It was immensely popular, getting repeated airplay on MTV and winning several of the network's Video Music Awards. It was also, then as now, misunderstood. A song about the underpinnings of adolescent suicide was widely seen as the story of a school shooter. Jeremy is based loosely on Jeremy Wade Delle, who, in January 1991, brought a .357 revolver to his English class in Richardson, Texas, and killed himself in front of his teacher and his fellow students. The song and its video inspired a cult following. One site devoted to Delle, The Jeremy Story, published a 2009 letter attributed to Delle's father, recounting years' worth of trinkets and notes left at his son's gravesite, as well as calls and emails from young teenagers with some perverse idea that what he did was really cool. The enthusiasm hasn't entirely abated. The domain name for the Jeremy Story was registered in 2012, and just this month a new post went up on the Facebook page Delle. These obsessives might have appreciated a claim that a defense attorney made during Barry Loukaitis' trial. Pearl Jam did not intend to transform a suicide into a mass murder. MTV, however, excised a central image from the video's final scene of Jeremy raising the gun to his mouth. The censor version gives us Jeremy at the front of the classroom with the gun at his side, and then his classmates at their desks, hands raised, white shirts blood spattered. Many viewers assumed the worst. I asked the director, Mark Pellington, who went on to direct many other videos and films, about this misreading of his work. He said that people were responding to a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, as the story was translated from life to song to screen. One jarring moment. Jeremy standing at the edge of a growing forest fire with his arms raised in a V, as the song says. Natalie E. Payton, a sociologist cited by Gladwell, has studied the self-produced videos of many post-Columbine shooters and identified an overall convergence of visual productions that includes this spreading of one's arms wide. Most famously, it's the pose that the Virginia Tech shooter, Seung-Hui Cho, who in 2007 killed 32 people and then himself, struck in his pre-recorded video statement, made with a gun in each hand. Shortly after that shooting, the film critic Stephen Hunter wrote in the Washington Post that Inspector Pang, from John Woo's 1992 film, Hard Boiled, could have been a model for Cho. In the movie, Pang declares, "Give a guy a gun. He thinks he's Superman. Give him 2, and he thinks he's God." Whatever the origin of the V, it made its way into the mind of 23-year-old Wellington Oliveira, who in 2011 copied poses from Cho's video before shooting 12 students and himself at his former middle school in Rio de Janeiro. In a 2001 oral history of Pearl Jam from Spin magazine, Eddie Vedder identified Jeremy as part of a lineage of teenage death songs. The music biographer Graham Thompson has written that the genre marks the first time in modern musical culture youth equates with introspection and unhappiness. One of the early anthems was Black Denim Trousers and Motorcycle Boots, recorded by the Cheers in 1955. Above a rat-a-tat snare, the singer urges on the terror of Highway 101, while the hero's sweetheart, Mary Lou, pleaded and begged him not to leave. She is right to worry. He hit a screaming diesel that was California-bound. In later years, the deaths rippled outward, from the boys to the girls who were the objects of their love or hate. Mark Dinnink's Teen Angel, which occupied the top slot of the Billboard Hot 100 for part of 1960, features a teenage couple whose car stalls on railroad tracks. The girl flees with her boyfriend to safety, but dashes back to recover a precious keepsake. Dinning sings, "They said they found my high school ring / clutched in your fingers tight." The following decades brought new weapons, the knife. In You're Gonna Kill That Girl, 1977, by the Ramones. The Razor Blade, in Blasphemous Rumors, 1984, by Depeche Mode. In Skid Row's 18 and Life, 1989, the crime is a teen-on-teen murder. The Jeremy video, coming late in this lineage, would always have functioned as an apologia for teenage violence. At one point, Jeremy rages at his parents, seated at the kitchen table. Vedder sings in the chorus, "Daddy didn't give attention. No." Slash to the fact that mommy didn't care. Later, in the classroom, Jeremy endures the taunts of the other students. They contort their faces. They encircle him with their desks. They graze his face with their fingers. Written on the chalkboard, anxiety disorders, environmental stress, hereditary factors. Pellington told me that his intention had been to portray a shameful, alienated, picked upon child. He added, the violence was the natural conclusion of the story. Which violence and whose story? According to Pellington, the treacherousness of the terrain surprised Pearl Jam, which refrained for 6 years from making another music video. I think Pearl Jam was very upset that this piece about an alienated kid who killed himself was taken to be this glorified piece about a guy who shoots his classmates. Pellington did his own penance during the 2014 election when he produced a set of PSAs for the Coalition Against Gun Violence. In one spot, a woman brushes her young daughter's hair as news of a school shooting comes on the television. Blood begins to drip from the woman's hands onto the girl's head, then onto a ballot with a Republican bubble filled in. A man's voice. You did not buy the guns, you did not load the bullets, you did not empty the chamber, but you voted. You voted for politicians that refuse to support common sense gun control. When I asked Pellington what he'd do differently if he were making the Jeremy video today, he said, I pull focus right up to the gun. That's the proper shot. Yet the Jeremy saga and the shooter's growing catalog of cultural influences suggests that Pellington wouldn't have been able to control the effects of the original cut either. Artworks escape the intentions of their creators as children evade the wishes of their parents. In Sue Klebold's account of her fight to keep the grim basement tapes private, people believed we were hiding something or protecting Dylan's reputation. She recalls the fear not only of spreading a murderous contagion, but also of propagating a comforting fantasy, that the tapes were the key to understanding her son's evil, that evil will present itself in a way that only a fool could fail to recognize. Klebold is not a fool. Her book makes clear, and though she and her son were quite close, she recognized nothing. I often think it would be far more instructive and frightening to show the video we took of Dylan on the afternoon of his prom, 3 days before the massacre, smiling and playfully tossing tiny snowballs at his dad behind the camera. As for the basement tapes, there just wasn't anything worth seeing.
Speaking of early first-time instances of guns at school.
Pearl Jam's Jeremy and the intractable cultural script of school shooters. For 2 decades, an iconic song and music video about teen suicide have been widely understood as a story of murder. Sue Klebold's memoir, A Mother's Reckoning, begins with a public tragedy on April 20th, 1999. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold armed their cells with guns and explosives and walked into Columbine High School. It continues with a private one. Dylan Klebold was my son. Klebold's project is to reconcile the private image of her son with the public one. To grasp how someone she so loved, someone by many accounts lovable, could have done something so horrifying. 17 years later, she still cannot generate an answer. There is Dill, the boy she raised, and _Time_ magazine's monster next door. The boy she never knew. The Dylan she never knew was, above all else, suicidal. Wayne Fuselier, a clinical psychologist and the FBI agent in charge of the Columbine investigation, told her that Harris, whom analysts posthumously judged a psychopath, went to the school to kill people and didn't care if he died, while Dylan wanted to die and didn't care if others died as well. Klebold notes that roughly half of the nearly 200 rampage shooters active in America between 1966 and 2000 were suicidal, citing a 2013 paper by the criminal justice specialist Adam Langford. Truly suicidal or not, rampage shooters have less than a 1% chance of escaping the consequences of their actions. She writes, to plan an event with such a disastrously low chance of escape or survival implies what Langford calls life indifference. Sometimes, it appears, children enter the cell of their teenage years and find this indifference stored inside, fully fledged. And in the United States, a gun is never far away. If most school shootings are also teen suicides, the potential for mass violence begins to seem ubiquitous. As Klebold points out, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has ranked suicide the third leading cause of death among children between 10 and 14 years old, and the second leading cause among those between 15 and 20-4. Closing parenthesis. Klebold writes, we know, without a doubt, that exposure to suicide or suicidal behavior can influence other vulnerable people to make an attempt. She regrets the release of surveillance footage of her son and his accomplice during the massacre, and celebrates Jefferson County's decision to keep private the so-called basement tapes, a series of threatening videos that the pair made before the murders. She also mentions Goethe's 1774 novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther, and the suicide of its lovelorn protagonist, which reportedly set off a battery of real-life copycats in much of Europe, a phenomenon codified in 1974 by the sociologist David Phillips as the Werther effect. Although Klebold does not think of herself as pro-censorship, she believes that video games, for instance, are likely particularly dangerous for vulnerable kids who are struggling with brain illness or other cofactors. She adds, in an act I greatly respect, the novelist Stephen King asked his publisher to withdraw his novel, Rage, after a number of school shooters quoted from it. Rage, about a teen who shoots up his high school and takes his algebra class hostage, was a favorite of Barry Laukaitis. 20 years ago this month, when Laukaitis was 14, he walked into Frontier Middle School dressed in a black duster and carrying 2 handguns, 78 rounds of ammunition, and a hunting rifle, as Malcolm Gladwell put it, last October in The New Yorker. After killing 3 people, including his algebra teacher, Laukaitis was subdued. Gladwell, writing shortly after a massacre at Umpqua Community College in Oregon, argued that school shooters aren't inherently deranged. Instead, over decades, a riot logic has unfolded, with the truly disturbed throwing the first bricks, followed by those who have overcome higher natural barriers to violence. Killers like Eric Harris, who needed no encouragement to resort to murder, make it easier for the likes of Dylan Klebold to participate. The black coat of Laukaitis, the black coats of Klebold and Harris, these have become part of the standard uniform for school shooters, as Gladwell puts it, invoking the sociologist Ralph Larkin's notion that Columbine laid down the cultural script for the next generation of shooters. Each new shooting seems to cement Columbine's place at the start of the line, but the script has a prehistory too. When Laukaitis was tried, his defense team claimed that he'd taken inspiration from the music video for Pearl Jam's Jeremy from the group's 1991 album 10, which describes a boy who imagines mountaintops with him on top as the dead lay in pools of maroon below. The video, released the next year, alternates between clips of Pearl Jam's frontman, Eddie Vedder, wide-eyed and greasy-haired, and visions of the teenage Jeremy tearing through his parents' home in a forest clearing before finally bringing a gun to school. It was immensely popular, getting repeated airplay on MTV and winning several of the network's Video Music Awards. It was also then as now misunderstood. A song about the underpinnings of adolescent suicide was widely seen as the story of a school shooter. Jeremy is based loosely on Jeremy Wade Delle, who, in January 1991, brought a .356 .37 revolver to his English class in Richardson, Texas, and killed himself in front of his teacher and his fellow students. The song and its video inspired a cult following, one site devoted to Delle. The Jeremy Story published a 2009 letter attributed to Delle's father, recounting years' worth of trinkets and notes left at his son's grave site, as well as calls and emails from young teenagers with some perverse idea that what he did was really cool. The enthusiasm hasn't entirely abated. The domain name for the Jeremy Story was registered in 2012, and just this month a new post went up on the Facebook page, R.I.P. Jeremy, Wade Delle. These obsessives might have appreciated a claim that a defense attorney made during Barry Laukitis' trial. This boy is Jeremy. Pearl Jam did not intend to transform a suicide into a mass murder. MTV, however, excised a central image from the video's final scene of Jeremy raising the gun to his mouth. The censored version gives us Jeremy at the front of the classroom with the gun at his side, and then his classmates at their desks. Hands raised, white shirts blood spattered. Many viewers assumed the worst. I asked the director, Mark Pellington, who went on to direct many other videos and films, about this misreading of his work. He said that people were responding to a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox as the story was translated, from life to song to screen. One jarring moment, Jeremy standing at the edge of a growing forest fire with his arms raised in a V. As the song says, Natalie E. Patone, a sociologist cited by Gladwell, has studied the self-produced videos of many post-Columbine shooters and identified an overall convergence of visual productions that includes this spreading of one's arms wide. Most famously, it's the pose that the Virginia Tech shooters, Wee Cho, who in 2007 killed 32 people, and then himself struck in his pre-recorded video statement, made with a gun in each hand. Shortly after that shooting, the film critic Stephen Hunter wrote in the Washington Post that Inspector Pang, from John Woo's 1992 film, Hardboiled, could have been a model for Cho in the movie. Pang declares, give a guy a gun, he thinks he's Superman. Give him two, and he thinks he's God. Whatever. The origin of the V, it made its way into the mind of 23-year-old Wellington Oliveira, who in 2011 composed poses from Cho's video before shooting 12 students and himself at his former middle school in Rio de Janeiro. From Spin magazine, Eddie Vedder identified Jeremy as part of the lineage of teenage death songs. The music biographer Graham Thompson has written that the genre marks the first time in modern musical culture youth equates with introspection and unhappiness. One of the early anthems was Black Denim Trousers and Motorcycle Boots, recorded by the Cheers. In 1955, above a rat-a-tat snare, the singer urges on the terror of Highway 101, while the hero's sweetheart, Mary Lou, pleaded and begged him not to leave. She is right to worry. He hit a screaming diesel that was California bound. In later years, the deaths rippled outward, from the boys to the girls who were the objects of their love or hate. Mark Dinning-S' Tune Angel, which occupied the top slot of the Billboard Hot 100 for part of 1960, features a teenage couple whose car stalls on railroad tracks. The girl flees with her boyfriend to safety, but dashes back to recover a precious keepsake. Dinning sings, they said they found my high school ring, clutched in your fingers tight. The following decades brought new weapons. The knife in You're Gonna Kill That Girl in 1977 by the Ramones. The razor blade in Blasphemous Rumors 1984 by Depeche Mode. In Skid Row's 18 and Life 1989. The crime is a teen-on-teen murder. The Jeremy video, coming late in this lineage, would always have functioned as an apologia for teenage violence. At one point, Jamie rages at his parents, seated at the kitchen table. Vedder sings in the chorus, Daddy didn't give attention, no, to the fact that Mommy didn't care. Later, in the classroom, Jeremy endures the taunts of the other students. They contort their faces. They encircle him with their desks. They graze his face with their fingers, written on the chalkboard. Anxiety disorders, environmental stress, hereditary factors. Pellington told me that his intention had been to portray a shameful, alienated, picked-upon child, he added. The violence was the natural conclusion of the story. Which violence, and whose story? According to Pellington, the treacherousness of the terrain surprised Pearl Jam, which refrained for 6 years from making another music video. I think Pearl Jam was very, very upset that this piece, about an alienated kid who killed himself, was taken to be this glorified piece about a guy who shoots his classmates. Pellington did his own penance during the 2014 election, when he produced a set of PSAs for the Coalition Against Gun Violence. In one spot, a woman brushes her young daughter's hair as news of a school shooting comes on the television. Blood begins to drip from the woman's hands onto the girl's head, then onto a ballot with the Republican bubble filled in. A a man's voice. You did not buy the guns. You did not load the bullets. You did not empty the chamber. But you voted. You voted for politicians that refused to support common sense gun control. When I threw the question at Pellington about what he'd do differently if he were whipping up the Jeremy video today, he shot back, "I'd pull focus right up to the damn gun." That's the shot that really packs a punch. But let's be real here though. Jeremy's saga and the shooter's ever-growing buffet of cultural influences scream that Pellington wouldn't have been able to rein in the chaos of the original cut either. Art has a sneaky way of slipping through the fingers of its creators, much like kids dodging their parents' rules. Take Sue Klebold, for example, her desperate battle to keep those hunting basement tapes under wraps. People thought we were hiding something or trying to polish Dylan's tarnished reputation. Speaks volumes. She was terrified, not just of spreading a murderous plague, but of fueling a comforting fantasy that those tapes held the golden key to deciphering her son's wickedness, that evil would strut around like a neon sign, obvious to anyone with half a brain. Klebold is no fool, and her book slams the point home. She and her son were thick as thieves, yet she saw nothing. I often ponder how much more enlightening and downright chilling it would be to showcase the video we captured of Dylan on the day of his prom, just 3 days before the tragedy, grinning like a Cheshire cat and tossing tiny snowballs at his dad, who was behind the camera, completely oblivious. And as for those basement tapes, honestly, there just wasn't a damn thing worth watching.
How does one go about working towards ending zone? Entire shit. They normally follow this progression.
Interlude. Depression stages. Stage 1 is ideation stage, during which a depressed person finds himself thinking about suicide more and more. However, the fear of suicide still outweighs its attraction. Therefore, the person may be thinking dark thoughts. My family would be better off without me. Obsessing over dark music, i.e., playing the same depressing song over and over again, or expressing thoughts of death, suicide, pain, and hopelessness through artistic expression, but has not yet begun to formulate a specific plan, all of which can be attributed to Jeremy a ton. Stage 2 is the planning stage, during which the person's dark thoughts begin to turn to formulating a specific plan for suicide. Friends and family may notice the person's depression worsening and the individual's substance abuse increasing. Stage 2 rarely lasts longer than several months because it is a very psychologically painful place to be. The person feels compelled to make a decision to suicide, thus moving into Stage 3, or not to suicide at that time. A decision that most people do not discuss with loved ones and often wrestle with in isolation. Stage 3 begins when a suicidal person makes the decision to commit suicide. The moment the decision is made, the person goes on autopilot. People in Stage 3 are imminently lethal. However, they seem more normal than they appeared in a long time. Depression seems to suddenly lift because the person has made the final decision and is no longer wrestling with it. Unfortunately, most mental health professionals and family members are not trained to recognize autopilot, and they breathe a sigh of relief because their patient seems to be much better now, not realizing that she is on a collision course with suicide. People on autopilot typically attempt suicide within the next 48 hours. It is crucial to be alert when a depressed patient who doesn't seem to improve after months of intervention suddenly seems to get better. Instead of relaxing, become more vigilant when you see a sudden, overnight improvement. Listen closely to any indication that the individual has decided to end their life and mobilize support among family, friends, and medical/behavioral health providers.
Why did they not get this poor boy help? False.
Late 1989. Jeremy starts grade 9 at Bryan Adams High School in DSD for 1989 to 90 school year. March 8, 1990. At Winter Chill Retreat sponsored by Casa View Baptist Church in Dallas suburb Mesquite, Jeremy meets Nancy and they begin dating. Late March 1990. Jeremy withdraws from grade 9 at Bryan Adams High School in the Dallas Independent School District, DSD. He attends Richardson Junior High School in the Richardson Independent School District, RSD, while living with his father in 600 Rory Drive. April 1990. Nancy breaks up with Jeremy. Read what Nancy had to say about their relationship and Jeremy's personality here. 2 days later, Jeremy is hospitalized after trying to commit suicide by taking an unknown quantity of pills. Suicide attempt number 1. Jeremy admitted to an inpatient adolescent program at Timbalon Psychiatric Hospital in Dallas. June 1990. Joseph and Wanda modify custody of Jeremy. Joseph becomes managing conservator. Wanda has to pay child support, and they split insurance and medical costs. July 1990. According to police records, Jeremy meets Nancy again at Summerburn Retreat of Casa View Baptist Church. He climbed up a cliff and threatened to jump off. He did not jump but received counseling from church authorities. No follow-up reported. Suicide attempt number 2. Jeremy gets passed to come home from Timbalon. He became outpatient but still attended the groups and counseling meetings at Timbalon. One night he drives to Nancy's house and threatens to shoot himself because of family and school problems. Suicide attempt number 3. Michelle meets Jeremy at Timbalon and they date. October 1990. Michelle is readmitted to Timbalon. Jeremy is released. Michelle and Jeremy break up. October 1990. Michelle is readmitted to Timbalon. Jeremy is released. Michelle and Jeremy break up. Read what Michelle had to say about their relationship and Jeremy's personality here. Late October 1990. Jeremy began attending Richardson High School on October 16, 1990. According to RHS Assistant Principal Mr. Roseborough, the problems that Jeremy faced at Richardson HS dealt with truancy and an alleged threat against his algebra teacher. Jeremy had his locker searched 3 times before Christmas break. Searches yielded several bottles of Whiteout and a Cults That Kill book. November 1990. Jeremy casually tells multiple classmates about his fascination and preoccupation with suicide. He is reported to the school counselor. It is not known what the counselor suggested as treatment or if the person was even in the position to help Jeremy, given the severity of the symptoms. Early December 1990. Jeremy attends his last regular classes before being put in ISS for threats against teachers. December 11th, 1990. Jeremy allegedly steals money from a cash box after a RHS basketball game and is reported by fellow student for threats against his math and English teacher, as well as suicide intentions. December 12th, 1990. RHS Assistant Principal Joe Roseborough notifies Richardson police of the alleged threat, the Cults That Kill book, and the deer's leg found in Jeremy's locker. Mr. Roseborough said that RHS math teacher, Mrs. Neal, was not threatened directly by Jeremy, but that he made comments to other students. Something along the lines of, "Wouldn't it be funny if somebody just came in and blew her head off?" Those statements reached the principal, who then contacted police officer in school Mr. Foster to make a report. Jeremy was taken out of Mrs. Neal's class. Evening. Jeremy is arrested for theft. Police also questioned Jeremy about the threat against the math teacher. Jeremy attests that he made general comments and that it was twisted as rumors passed around students. Police recommended counseling. Joseph tells police that Jeremy has had a lot of psychological treatment, that Jeremy was at Timbalon in early 1990, and that he is checking into other options for Jeremy. Joseph also asks for the theft to be reported to the juvenile system for help. December 14th, 1990. Jeremy is confined to ISS the rest of the year for both threats and locker contents, and also due to the fact that he was hospitalized at Timbalon. He was in ISS before due to smoking, substance abuse, and truancy. Late December 1990. Sometime after Christmas, Jeremy tells Michelle B. that he was given a gun as a present / comment, which was not true, as he stole the gun later from the drawer in the house of his dad's girlfriend. January 6, 1991. At about 11 a.m., Michelle calls Jeremy. Michelle remembers that Jeremy seemed depressed as always. He boasted that he was on acid and that he did more drugs than ever before. Michelle told him that she might be pregnant, but that Jeremy is not the father. Sometime during the conversation, Jeremy told Michelle he would die for her. Afterwards, Michelle called Wanda to report Jeremy sounded strange on the phone. Michelle said she felt Wanda did not show concern at the time / comment. This call must have crushed Jeremy. But despite all, maybe he hoped they could raise the kid together. Although it was not his child, he remarked he would die for her, to assure her he would still be there for her. It was not mentioned how Michelle responded. She did sense something was off, and she called his mother, informing her about all of this. Why did she not call his dad? Maybe she felt more comfortable talking to Wanda. There was no further info in the police records. Later it was revealed that Michelle was not pregnant. Jeremy wrote in one of his last notes that Michelle was not to blame, but the actions and conversations between the two were considered in his decision. January 1991. Jeremy starts to write and send suicide letters as well as tapes to friends. They would not arrive after he committed suicide. Chris from Austin provided a sample of those letters. January 7th, 1991. 11 a.m. Still in in-school suspension, Jeremy writes notes back and forth with Lisa, who was also confined to ISS at the time. He liked to talk about his life and to get to know Lisa and her life. They were writing about their school and private life, their problems in general. His last note ended with later days, instead of the usual right back, which caught Lisa's attention because she thought it was unusual. She later stated in a newspaper interview she did never expect what happened the next day. January 7th, 1991. 3:30 p.m. Jeremy leaves school and catches a bus for his regular one-on-one counseling appointment at the aerobic center with Dr. Bob H. 6 p.m. The counseling session ends and Jeremy walks to the house of Joseph's girlfriend at Harvest Hill Road, which was nearby. Joseph's girlfriend also gave counseling and was not expected to come home until 9:30 p.m. According to the police report and Joseph's statements, it was agreed that after the counseling sessions, Jeremy was to wait at Joseph's girlfriend's house for his dad to pick him up. as he was working late on the counseling days. Jeremy would enter an unlocked door and raid the fridge while watching TV. 6:25 p.m. Jeremy pages Joseph to say he is at the girlfriend's house. /comment. Today you would communicate via messenger of your choice on a smartphone. Back then a pager must have been futuristic, at least a bit. Although RHS students at the time have reported it was very common for students back then to have one of those. How did Jeremy feel about the fact he had to page Joseph all the time? Maybe it fueled his resentments of being controlled and constricted. 6:30 p.m. Jeremy calls Nancy and tells her that this was the last time they would talk due to the fact that he and his dad were leaving for Tokyo, Japan the next day. He also advised he had acquired an expensive ring for her for $800 from Lord & Taylor and that he would be mailing her a letter and this ring the next day. He wanted her to always wear the ring and remember him while he was in Japan. He promised to write her, and he wanted the ring to be a friendship, promise, or even engagement ring. They talked for nearly an hour. According to the Jeremy story, during the evening, Jeremy calls RHS student to ask for help getting rid of a stolen stereo and getting drugs for a friend in rehab. Jeremy also talked about being tired of the bullshit that he had been putting up with at home, that he was in big trouble, and that he was really mad at Joseph. The police report states that it was suspected Jeremy stole both gun and golden ring from the house of Joseph's girlfriend at Harvest Hill Road on this day. One can suspect he snatched the gun from the unlocked drawer in the bedroom from 6:20 p.m. to the time he called Nancy. 7:20 p.m. Joseph picks up Jeremy from the girlfriend's house. Joseph recalls Jeremy seemed happy, upbeat, and normal. They went home and watched a movie on TV. 8:30 p.m. Jeremy calls Wanda, no details about the caller now. Wanda reportedly stated during the interview of 2018 to WFAA, she was supposed to gather Jeremy from school on the fateful day in January. 10 p.m. Jeremy goes to bed. January 8th, 1991. 5:30 a.m. Joseph leaves the house to go to work. 7:10 a.m. Joseph calls Jeremy to make sure he was up and ready for school. Before leaving for school, Jeremy called Nancy again one last time at 7:30 a.m. They spoke for about 20 minutes. He told her he and his dad were leaving for Japan at 3 p.m. on that day. He was en route to the DPS to get his passport. He also said he was stoned on marijuana. Nancy recalled Jeremy to be in good spirits and that he did not talk of suicide. She said that he was so at peace, so much more than I had ever seen him. January 8th, 1991, 8:20 a.m. Jeremy pages Joseph to notify him he arrived at school. He dropped off his backpack at ISS and went to the Eagle's Nest cafeteria wearing his big white coat. There he met fellow students and gave them ring and letter to be mailed after school by them because he was not going to be around after school. Jeremy did not seem to be depressed at all, but happy. There were at least 2 female eyewitnesses that were hugged by him and seen Jeremy smile, and in good mood for the first time. 9 a.m. Joseph receives call from Mr. Roseborough, who reported that Jeremy was missing from class. Sometime after 9:35 a.m., Jeremy enters English class 2, room B201, and is handed a hall pass by Mrs. Barnett to get to the school office and receive a new ISS admittance. He takes off his white coat and puts it on a desk in the back of the room. He leaves the room and removes something from his locker number 540, presumably the gun. He returns to the room and puts his hall pass on Barnett's desk and says something like, "Miss, this is what I went for," or "This is what has to be done," or "This is what I really need," depending on the source. Then, he placed the gun in his mouth and shot himself. According to several witnesses, there was no time to react. This happened in front of a full classroom of 30 students, now mentally scarred for life.
But boy did this boy fancy Nancy.
Nancy was Jeremy's first big love, a love story which included huge drama. She was a year older than Jeremy. She had blondish brown, long curly hair, and a bright smile. At the time they met, Nancy was a nice, friendly, and social girl who excelled at school, like all year honor roll. Nancy was not at all involved in the stuff that Jeremy was in or suffered from, e.g. his drug abuse and problems stemming from depression. Those problems would eventually lead to their breakup. Later, Nancy became interested in administration and management in general. She addressed teen problems like skipping school and stress from studying in extended exam periods. She stated about truancy, sitting through detentions can be really boring and make you not want to skip again. About final exam time, she remarked that it seems like every time I turned around, I was having to take another test. It never seemed to end until they started to release the classes. That was the best feeling I have ever had, knowing that I wouldn't have to take another test for 3 months. According to Nancy, Jeremy was talking a lot about suicide and was into music that dealt with death and suicide. This is significant, as it makes evident that his suicidal ideation did not originate from a breakup, but from other issues, possibly his broken family life. brain chemistry, an underlying condition, a trauma event in the past, or a combination of all. The breakup was only a catalyst. Rory Drive and the surrounding neighborhood appears lower middle class. In 2018, houses got a bit old, but the area was peaceful, quiet, secure, and clean. Any ideas about the early 90s situation? It is not known why Jeremy moved in with his dad all of a sudden after living with his mom for years and being rather successful at BAHS in his first year there. Nancy lived in Mesquite. He lived near this place at Jonesboro with his mother Wanda. Richardson is way up north. Effectively, it became more difficult for Nancy and Jeremy to meet, although the driving license was just around the corner at age 16. Nancy mentioned in the police records that Jeremy would often remove his parents' cars without their consent to visit friends. Anyway, it is entirely possible the sudden move had to do with Jeremy's anger and mental health problems, which could be too much to handle for Wanda and Jeremy's sister back then. But this is just a theory. Evidently, Jeremy longed for Nancy and had a very hard time accepting they broke up. It is not clear whether Jeremy dated Michelle before or after the episodes at Nancy's house and the church retreat event. He would call each of them after the breakup and talk about life and love. It is apparent, though, he still needed medical treatment. Jeremy's artistic and creative letters with drawings written at this time in his life and sent to Michelle attest his love and affection for her. According to the police reports, his letters show that he really wanted to have a family with Michelle. The police report does not mention the contents of the letters he wrote to Nancy, but it can be assumed they were of the same quality. Maybe this is when he lost it. He was suicidal before, but the 3 attempts seemed more or less like they were cries for help and attention, not really planned out. The last reported attempt was in July. He went several months without incident, as far as the police records go. For any adolescent, moving several times in a short time span, changing classes all the time, not really being able to keep long-lasting friends or develop relationships must lead to feelings of alienation. Jeremy must have felt this way too, like he was not able to fit in anywhere, although this was hardly his fault. Adding to the fact that it was probably not true, as some friends remember him to this day. Depression makes you not realize those things. Add the broken home he came from, with all the weirdness this brings. Almost every divorced child can whistle this tune to some degree. It became apparent Jeremy wanted to have a functional family of his own. Guess this is why he so desperately searched for a girlfriend who was committed to marry him in order to start a family, something to call his own. All those problems were destined to worsen his mental condition. Some friends who knew Jeremy suggested that he suffered from not diagnosed borderline personality disorder. Wonder what the readers think. BPD is certainly a possibility, but it was not mentioned in the police reports. BPD patients suffer from tantalizing fear of losing someone when they are in a relationship. Therefore, they appear clingy and controlling sometimes. They also face anger issues. It is a very complex disease that is usually only diagnosed in early adulthood due to being so difficult to grasp. A compiled list comparison of bipolar II and BPD from various sources can be found here and here. Whiteout was used for snuffing or even drinking back then. The effects mirrored those of alcohol inebriation, but without being drunk. Snuffing was popular with kids during the 90s, but could lead to kidney failure and other serious health issues, which is why today's whiteout is made of different chemicals. Also, there are 2 editions of the Cults That Kill book, hardcopy 1988 and paperback 1989 with different designs. The report does not specify what kind of edition was found. The deer leg was found later, along with books on childbirth and fatherhood. Obviously, the threats and mental problems were the real reasons here. It can be assumed that the school staff did not know how to deal with Jeremy and wanted him out of the regular classes. He was carrying the stigma of being hospitalized at a psych ward. He did not feel comfortable at the new school, so he skipped a lot. It can be assumed it became a habit. And then the threats at Shep's website features an interview with an RHS official that sheds more light on the situation and also explains what ISS was like. It is worthy of discussion whether things would have been different if they reacted in another way back then. RHS staff was inviting and talking to Jeremy's dad to make him aware of all the problems, but the follow-up was a bit lacking. This call must have crushed Jeremy, but despite all, maybe he hoped they could raise the kid together. Although it was not his child, he remarked he would die for her, to assure her he would still be there for her. It was not mentioned how Michelle responded. She did sense something was off, and she called his mother, informing her about all of this. Why did she not call his dad? Maybe she felt more comfortable talking to Wanda. There was no further info in the police records. Later it was revealed that Michelle was not pregnant. Jeremy wrote in one of his last notes that Michelle was not to blame, but the actions and conversations between the two were considered in his decision.
Now what was the word around town? What did people have to say about all this? And what do they have to say to this day?
I used to think suicide was selfish, but lately I realized that in some ways suicide is another way of speaking. That's why the lyric Jeremy spoke in class today gets to me. I had a thought that so many famous people kill themselves quietly. They don't lack feeling heard, but they just want to escape. When you look at grandiose acts of suicide, it seems the common thread is that is the language of the unheard. They go unlistened to in life, but their final statement is so loud to be considered offensive. They go from feeling ostracized in silence to being even more so in death. People say they are selfish and attention-seeking, that they should have killed themselves quietly where no one would be bothered, instead of forcing those around them to beat witness to something so traumatizing. Maybe that's all true, but in one statement, they went from being forgotten to being something that some people can never forget. In their final moment, they were heard. I know that there probably isn't a real connection, but just a year before Jeremy was born, Christine Chubak infamously killed herself by gunshot in Florida. I can't help but wonder if Jeremy eventually learned of that incident while contemplating his own suicide. Honestly, I wish Jeremy had been able to find the help that he needed. He was troubled and had his problems. But I think that he really was, at heart, a good kid. Right now, he would be 48 years old. In 2 years from now, he'd be 50. In the middle of his life, potentially. He probably could have become a successful artist or even a drummer for a grunge band of his own. Or something impossible to know. Now Jeremy is forever immortalized as a 15 to 16-year-old boy who just needed a lot of help that he never got in life. I know that his family and the witnesses, who are understandably traumatized by what they witnessed, hate the song's popularity. But I look at it as the song preserving Jeremy's memory and getting his story out there to a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be interested at all. And in doing so, bringing up the very important issues that led to Jeremy's end. I once was in a place close to where Jeremy was at, not nearly as bad, but I was ostracized from my peers at school and felt very alone. Not liked by just about anyone and only having a very small circle of friends. I am glad I never did anything like he did. Some stories just stick with you. This is one. I was about 14 when this happened. It struck a chord with me because I also lived my life in survival mode. A product of divorce, abandonment, abuse, and poverty. I imagine some of the same thoughts Jeremy had in his head swirled in mine as well. Screaming out for attention, but at the same time wanting to be left alone. Just wanting to be heard, really. And heard he was. Those with suicidal thoughts don't just wake up one day and decide to take their own lives. It's a battle. Some win, but many don't. There is a relief when that decision is made. Finally, you don't have to struggle anymore. But we don't think of those we will hurt. We actually think everyone is better off without us. In Jeremy's case, he did want to cause pain. I don't think in a malicious way, he just wanted someone to finally understand and hear him. His blood was a physical manifestation of his pain. Unfortunately, so many who witnessed it were traumatized. At his age, you don't analyze. You just do what your emotions say. I often wonder where those witnesses are today. How were they affected during the years? The whole thing is sad. I wish I could go back and tell Jeremy not to do it. How that one decision would destroy so many lives. That life is ever-changing and can change for the better. Mine certainly did. Thankfully, my attempts were never successful. Thankfully, I got help. I wish he could have found the correct help. BPD was not well known about then. My diagnosis didn't come until I was an adult. I'm glad mental illness is taken more seriously now. But we still have a long ways to go. Students and teachers are taught more about the signs of suicide and self-harm and what to do. Back then, there was not a lot of resources. The kids that he did open up to are not responsible. They were just kids themselves. Many probably thought he was not serious, especially if he had a history of lying. Such a sad ending to such a young life, and such a horrible thing to witnesses or be a part of and carry through your life. If you're suicidal, please seek help. Don't give up just yet. It's a permanent solution, especially if you're young. Emotions are all over the place at that age. You are not alone. People do care. Maybe you just haven't met them yet. I believe it's a matter of perspective. A lot of people did try to help Jeremy the way they thought was the best for him, but it seems that his issues were too complicated for the time. If it is true that Jeremy had borderline personality disorder, then there was no effective treatment available for it at the time. Not to mention that mental health, especially in South US, was a huge stigma, still is. So people were very reluctant about admitting it and therefore looking for help for it. Not to mention how expensive it was and still is. It is of no surprise that Jeremy developed a substance abuse issue. It is much cheaper to drown your problems in them than to look for proper therapy, unfortunately. Hi, I'm writing this letter for Jeremy's mom, dear Mrs. Wade. My name's Cameron, and I've been wanting to write this letter to you for a long time. I know we've never met, but I've been deeply touched by your son Jeremy's life. He meant so much to so many people, including me, and I've been thinking about you a lot too. I know Jeremy is no longer here, and I can't even imagine the pain you must carry. I just want you to know that your son made a big difference in this world. He inspired people with his strength, his heart, and his passion. Even now, he's still helping people through the memories he left behind. I also lost someone I love, my best friend Millie Jane Skinner. She had Down syndrome, and I have a condition called Prader-Willi syndrome, PWS. We were best friends since preschool, and we used to spend every Halloween, Easter, and the 100th day of school together. Losing her was one of the hardest things I've ever been through. So, I guess in some small way I understand what it's like to miss someone so much it hurts. I really wanted to send you this letter because it helps me feel closer to both Jeremy and Millie. I also wanted to ask if it's ever possible. I'd love to get a letter back from you. Something I could keep in my room to remember that our hearts are still connected by love, even through loss. Thank you for raising someone as special as Jeremy, and thank you for taking the time to read this. I'm sending you all my love and prayers. It'll mean a lot to me if you could write me back. Sincerely, Cameron. Jeremy was my best friend at the time of his death. We met at Timberlawn, where we were both in patient adolescence. I discharged in late September of 1990 and came back home to Austin. Here's a hilarious Jeremy story for you. In December of 1990, Jeremy stole his mom's car and drove to Austin for a surprise visit. I quickly realized he had taken her car without her knowledge. I'll never forget him calling me from a gas station in Austin, freaking the fuck out because there were cops everywhere. I told him to tell me the cross streets where he was and I'd come get him. I was 16 and had a driver's license and lead him back to my parents' house. Turns out that fucking guy was directly across from APD headquarters, hence cops everywhere, and he in a stolen car. LOL. In his mind, he was going to stay in Austin and had told kids from his school about the pregnancy that wasn't real, and that he was leaving to be with his kid. I can't remember the name of the girl who was the alleged mother. It might have been Michelle. He wound up staying for a few days after my parents talked to his mom and agreed that maybe some cooling off would help him. That was the last time I physically ever saw him. I still have a so-long suicide letter that arrived at my parents' house, addressed to my sister when my mom and I were up at the funeral. I randomly just ran across this site when thinking about him yesterday. It has been an interesting flashback that has sent me down the rabbit hole of memories from 30 years ago. I would be willing to contribute to your research with what I remember about him in those times. Chris. In the late 90s, I contacted the Richardson Police Department to ask about the audio tapes, but I was informed they had been destroyed. Still, I can't shake the feeling that 1 to 2 tapes might still exist, though whoever has them seems unwilling to share. Over the years, I suspected that the silence surrounding Jeremy was due to his father's influence. It wasn't until his father passed away that Wanda, Jeremy's mother, finally gave an interview on the news. In the early 2000s, I wrote a letter to Jeremy's former home, and the lady living there kindly responded by sending me photos of the living room and bedrooms. She was very nice, and although the house is quite small, the living room felt cozy. It's also been touching to see some of Jeremy's friends disclose the letters he sent. His handwriting is just as neat as I had read about back in the 90s. It would be wonderful if Ash, the owner of this website, could conduct an audio interview with Jeremy's friends, the ones who shared the letters, asking them questions and gathering fond memories they have of him. Since the 90s, I've always believed that Jeremy wasn't bullied. But after revisiting everything, I'm starting to think he was. He only started in that class in October and ended up in ISS a few months later, so he likely didn't have a chance to become friendly with anyone in that classroom. Around 2005, I reached out to the school counselor at Richardson High School. I don't recall the specifics of what I wrote, but I do remember that the counselor had never even heard of Jeremy or the incident. It seemed that no one at the school knew about it. Before she replied to my email, she had asked several colleagues. No one even knew Jeremy's name. When I asked her about the old English classroom, she mentioned that it had been converted into a storage room and, to her knowledge, had never been used as a classroom since. It appears that after Jeremy's suicide, the room was locked and never reopened as a classroom. I also traced every home that Jeremy and Wanda lived in, though I no longer have the records. They moved around Richardson nearly twice a year. One year, they even moved 3 times. It's anyone's guess why they were relocating so frequently. I no longer have the interior photos, but I remember the house quite well. At the time, a young woman was living there, and I reached out to her asking if she could share some photos. To my surprise, she did reply. I specifically asked her not to take any pictures of her bedroom out of respect for her privacy, as that would have been Joseph's room anyway. The house was cozy and small, with the kitchen and lounge combined into one room. A narrow, dark hallway led to a small bedroom on the left, which would have been Jeremy's room. It was a modest space. If you're interested, you might consider sending them a letter yourself, explaining your reasons for reaching out. They may be willing to share some photos. I remember the house being quite dark, and from one of the photos, it seemed to have been taken during the day, based on the light coming through the window. The woman mentioned she wasn't familiar with Pearl Jam or Jeremy Wade Delle, but was genuinely intrigued by what I shared with her. I read somewhere that Jeremy's father had passed away, possibly in an article related to Wanda's TV interview. I tried to locate it again but couldn't find it. However, I distinctly recall reading about his father's passing. Being a spiritual person, I thought it must be comforting for Jeremy to be reunited with his dad. Jeremy's father was older when he was born, possibly in his 30s or 40s. If his stepfather was the one who passed away, Jeremy's dad would be in his mid-80s by now. It's possible the newspaper referred to his stepfather as his father. I've noticed that Jeremy's sister frequently posts about her mother and their time together, but she rarely mentions her father. I know she loved him. She once posted a photo of him, but it has since been removed. Regarding Steele, I'm skeptical of his claims. I remember his website, and much of what he posted didn't seem credible. I doubt he had any tapes. If you're trying to determine if Chris is still alive, it wouldn't be too difficult with some effort. I assume Ash knows his last name. Looking ahead, you might want to contact Mrs./Miss King, who was interviewed in the news article about Jeremy. She was present in the classroom at the time and could clarify whether Jeremy was bullied or share any other memories she might have. However, given that Jeremy wasn't in the class for long, she may not know much. It might also be worthwhile to reach out to Wanda, especially now that she has given an interview to a news channel after all these years. I'm sure she would be open to speaking with Ash or you, especially since you're part of a website dedicated to Jeremy. She might even be willing to share more photos or artwork. When I was deep into researching everything I could about Jeremy, including tracking down all the addresses he lived at, I never considered writing to Wanda. I assumed she was still finding it difficult to talk about it. But now that she's been on the news, it seems she might be more open to discussing Jeremy.
This last segment is a special treat, and it is me somehow making all of this about Queen Elizabeth's feelings. And I do not remember making this, and I don't know why.
On the morning of January 8th, 1991, Jeremy Wade Delle was late to school, missing his first class of the day. When the 15-year-old showed up for his second period English class, having missed morning registration, his teacher, Faye Barnett, asked him to go to the school office to get an admittance slip. Instead, Delle returned to class with a gun, a .357 Magnum revolver. "Miss, I got what I really went for," Delle told Barnett, walking to the front of the classroom. Facing his classmates, the teenager then put the barrel of the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Fellow pupils in classes throughout Richardson High School, located in an inner suburb of Dallas, Texas, heard the bang echoing through the halls and assumed that someone was playing a joke. But then we heard a girl running down the hall screaming. One student told reporters from the Dallas Morning News it was a scream from the heart. Reading about the teenager's death by suicide in a single paragraph, newspaper story struck a chord with Pearl Jam frontman Eddie Vedder, who remembered that he totally related because I had a very similar experience with a kid who I grew with while a 7th grade junior high school student. Vedder recalled a fellow pupil bringing a gun into a geography class and firing bullets into a 1,000-gallon fish tank. And I had gotten in a fight with this kid like a year earlier. Vedder told music writer Corinne Bliss in 1991 after reading the newspaper article about Jeremy Wade Delle. Vedder wrote a song inspired by these two separate stories and titled it Jeremy. The song would become the third single released from Pearl Jam's debut album, 10, and while often reluctant to explain his lyrics, Vedder felt that the issues which informed the song were important to address. Advertisement. If it weren't for music, I think I would have shot myself in the front of the classroom. Eddie Vedder. I've kept a lot of songs, The lyrical content like shrouded in mystery, he told Houston. Texas radio DJ David Sadoff in 1991. Just because. It's been really great to get other people's interpretations and even inject themselves into the songs. And I think then it becomes something bigger than just like 5 guys in a band and this is their song, But Jeremy, I think I decided I will start talking about what that song is about. In 1992, Vedder shot a video for the song, filmed at a New Jersey high school with director Mark Pellington, whose previous credits included U2's video for One and the Disposable Heroes of Hifeprize's video for television, The Drug of the Nation. The video, which starred 12-year-old Trevor Wilson as an alienated teenager bullied by classmates, helped the song become a worldwide hit and won no fewer than 4 MTV Video Music Awards in 1993, including the prestigious Video of the Year award. Reflecting on the remarkable events of January 8, 1991, when she was only a young girl of 16 years old, Queen Elizabeth II tenderly confessed, This indeed was a truly significant awakening of mine. It felt like the universe was telling me, in that moment, that life isn't going to be all sunshine and rainbows. You know? There are those inevitable realities of life that confront us. Tragedies that unfold, and it genuinely made me grow up pretty much overnight. In a way that was truly unexpected. It's not every day that a 16-year-old girl might have to face a new reality in her life. But this is precisely what happened to Queen Elizabeth II on that fateful day in January 8, 1991. On that date, the young monarch had to face the many challenges and expectations that life had in store for her, and also navigate through the emotional turmoil that stemmed from the unexpected loss of her beloved father. In her candid reminiscence of that experience, she expressed how everything seemed to shift in perspective suddenly. It was an awakening that enabled her to redefine her path and explore who she was while growing up at a pace that was previously unimaginable. Elizabeth II realized how important it was to face the dark side of life candidly if she was going to truly learn to embrace every experience that life had to offer. It's undeniable that the events of January 8, 1991 shaped and molded the life of Queen Elizabeth II in a way that no other experience could have. Today, she is a symbol of strength and resilience, and her remarkable story serves as a testament to the power of the human spirit to conquer the most daunting obstacles in life. Accepting that award from Red Hot Chili Peppers duo Better and the audience at the Universal Award for Music, I think I would have shot myself in the front of the classroom. It really is what kept me alive. So this is to the power of music. For all the acclaim it garnered, the video for Jeremy was not without version of the video. Trevor Wilson is shown placing the gun in his mouth, but as the song's guidelines meant that this and so the gun was dropped out of the shot. But when TV viewers saw that the video named characters shot and horror, many assumed that the student had turned the gun on fellow students. Pellington would later describe this misinterpretation as the greatest frustration generated entirely since had 14-year-old Washington handgun and shot and killed his teacher, Leona Tears, and classmates and Arnold Frisk. His lawyer claimed that the video for Jeremy defense rejected the teenager was sentenced to serve to life plus an additional 5 possibility of parole. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that committed when they were under 18 did not receive automatic life sentences. In 2017, Al-Qaeda was sentenced to 189 years in prison. What I did was weak in 2020, and Pearl Jam finally released the uncensored National Gun Violence Awareness Gun Violence. Since the band said in a statement, we have released the uncensored video, which unavailable in 1992. Censorship we can prevent gun deaths. Whether mass law enforcement that day that he died did not his life. She told Texas TV a brother, he was a nephew, a grandson, a cousin, he was a friend, he was talented. Brittany King, a former classmate of Delle, and expressed her frustration for telling a story which truly reflect the reality of the tragedy. At them for writing that song. I thought, you don't know there. That story is not accurate.
Now the song that got everybody talking, but I made it visually much, much better. time to hear this entire letter he left for his friend Chris.
An original ArtFreak production. ArtFreak Bethel Clinic. Thank you for watching.